You know how some cars get way better gas mileage than others? Well, it turns out the same thing happens with cows. Seriously, some cattle are just incredibly good at packing on weight with very little food, while others seem to eat and not get the same results. So today, let's dive into this really fascinating biological puzzle.
This right here is the central mystery. It's a question that has had scientists and ranchers scratching their heads for a long time. What's the secret sauce that makes one cow a fuel-efficient machine and another, well, kind of like a gas guzzler? It's a huge question, and the answer could really change the game for sustainable agriculture.
Okay, so the official term we're talking about is feed efficiency. It's actually a pretty simple idea when you break it down. How good is an animal at turning the food it eats into, more animal? A high-efficiency cow is just like a car with awesome MPG. It gets you further on less fuel. So what's actually happening under the hood to make that possible?
For a long time, the #1 suspect has been the gut microbiome. We're talking about this incredibly complex world of trillions of microbes living in the cow's stomach. It basically acts like a giant fermentation factory, breaking down all that tough grass and plant matter into usable energy. The logic seemed pretty simple, right? A better, more efficient factory should mean a more efficient cow.
So, to figure out how this factory works, researchers started with the most obvious thing you can change: the raw materials going in, the cow's diet. And what they found gave them their very first major clue.
And wow, this slide just says it all. It shows just how huge of an impact diet has. When the scientists looked at which microbes were actually active, they saw this massive split. You can see it clear as day. The microbial communities from cows eating forage, that's the green group, are clustered way over here, and they're completely separate from the grain-fed cows over in red. They're basically two different microbial worlds. So check, what a cow eats totally reshapes its internal factory floor.
Okay, so this leads to a really logical next question, doesn't it? If diet changes the microbes that much, then the high-efficiency cows must just have a better set of microbes than the low-efficiency ones. It seems like a pretty open and shut case.
But here's the plot twist, and this is where it gets really interesting. When the scientists actually compared the microbiomes of high-efficiency and low-efficiency cows that were eating the exact same diet, they found almost no difference. Just look at this chart. The dots for both groups are all mixed up together. There's no clear separation at all. So the blueprint for the factory, it looked pretty much identical for both the super-efficient cows and the gas guzzlers.
Well, that was a huge surprise. I mean, if the entire community of microbes isn't the answer, the mystery just got a whole lot deeper. It's not about the whole team of workers in the factory. So, is it about just a few all-star players?
And that's exactly where they look next. The researchers realized it might not be about who's just standing around on the factory floor, but about who's actually punching the clock and doing the work.
To figure this out, they use this really powerful technique called meta-transcriptomics. The best way to think about it is like a form of high-tech eavesdropping. Instead of just counting every microbe that's there, they can actually listen in on the messages being sent out, which told them exactly which microbes were active and what jobs they were doing at that very moment.
And what they heard was fascinating. It all came down to specificity. In the efficient cows eating forage, two particular microbes, Fibrobacter and Butyrvibrio, were working overtime. When the diet changed to grain, a completely different specialist, UBA 1067, stepped up as the star performer. But then you look at the low-efficiency cows, and you see this one microbe, Ruminococcus was consistently more active no matter what they were eating. It was the designated underperformer.
This discovery, that efficient cows were boosting the activity of specific microbes that were perfect for their diet, led to a brand new, kind of groundbreaking theory about the relationship between an animal and all those microbes inside it.
So let's just walk through the logic here. 1. We know the overall microbe teams look the same. 2. We now see that the efficient cows are selectively turning up the volume on the exact right microbes for the job. And 3. This points to something pretty revolutionary. The cow isn't just a passive container for all this stuff, it's actively managing the factory floor.
The researchers came up with a great name for this: efficient host-mediated microbial amplification. It's this idea that a high-efficiency cow is like a brilliant factory manager. It sees the raw materials coming in, the diet, and then it actively promotes or amplifies the best workers for that specific task. It's not passive at all. It's an active partnership.
And this chart really drives that point home. Using some pretty complex modeling, the scientists figured out how that microbial community gets put together. And in the high-efficiency cows, yeah, about 2/3 of the community seems to be there just by random chance. But a really significant chunk, up to 28%, is being actively and positively selected by the cow. The factory manager is essentially handpicking more than a quarter of its workforce to ensure success.
Okay, so the host, the cow, is picking the winners. But what makes these star players so good at their jobs in the first place? What's their secret weapon?
Well, the answer comes down to their molecular toolkit. These elite microbes are just covered in these special proteins called carbohydrate binding modules, or CBMs. The absolute best way to think about these is as tiny, molecular, sticky hands that let them grab onto food and just hold on tight while they break it down. And when you look at the difference in equipment, it's not even close. The star microbes that you find in the high-efficiency cows are just loaded with these sticky hand CBBMs. It makes them incredibly good at their job. But that underperforming microbe, Ruminococcus E, the one that was more active in the low-efficiency cows, it has far, far fewer of these critical tools. It's just not as well equipped.
And we're not talking about a small difference here. It is dramatic. That microbe that's associated with low-efficiency cows has about 10 times fewer of these sticky hands than some of its more efficient cousins. That's like trying to build a house with one screwdriver versus a whole truck full of power tools.
And here you can actually get a look at the machinery itself. This diagram shows an enzyme from Fibrobacter, one of those star players. You can see the part that does the digesting. That's GH51. But it's attached to this whole series of those sticky hand CBMs. This whole structure lets it latch onto plant fiber with incredible efficiency. And that's exactly why it's a star player in an efficient cow's gut.
So, we've gone from this big mystery all the way down to the molecular level. But what does all of this mean for the real world? Why does understanding a cow's internal factory actually matter?
Well, this really changes our whole understanding of animal efficiency. It's not just the animal, and it's not just the microbes. It's the partnership between them. And that gives us a potential roadmap for more sustainable farming. We now have these specific microbial targets, like Fibrobacter and Butrevio, that we could maybe promote through smarter feeding. Or, even more exciting, we might be able to breed animals that are just naturally better microbe managers.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. The authors of the study summed it up perfectly themselves. They said that these findings basically lay the foundation for a whole new way of thinking about how we can make livestock production more sustainable for all of us. And that really leaves us with a final, fascinating thought. For centuries, we've been focused on breeding a better cow. But maybe, just maybe, the real secret to a more efficient and sustainable future isn't about changing the cow at all, but about getting better at managing the trillions of microscopic workers that have been doing all the heavy lifting for them all along.